Hey, I recently found out that I'm autistic, and I wanted to share with you my story of how I finally got my diagnosis after years of uncertainty. This is my first scripted video, so please bear with me. Let's start at the beginning of my diagnosis journey. When people first started to notice that I had a disability, it was back when I was only 6. At the time, I was struggling with school and had memory and communication problems. Many of my classmates chose me as a target to bully, and since I had troubles with explaining and sticking up for myself, I was the only one getting into trouble. I was a very attentive child. I worked hard, did my homework, but no matter how much I tried, I would always fail my spelling and math test. My teacher noticed there was something off about me and told my parents to send me to our family doctor to get checked out. So my parents did. We headed to the doctor, and he said that I likely had a brain injury. My mom and I already knew this was not the case, since I had never been in any kind of accident, but my doctor seemed really confident that there was something wrong with my brain. So I got a brain scan, and I also went through some psychological evaluations. I remember being put in a room where I was observed while I was playing with toys with other children. I also remember being shown a series of images that I had to try and recall what I saw, and then I did a hearing test since my teacher thought my inability to pick up on the information from lessons had been due to hearing loss. After my brain scan and testing, I headed home, and then we awaited the results. A couple weeks later, and the test confirmed what my parents and I already knew: no brain injuries, and my hearing was incredible. Surprise, surprise. So the next step was the school board to send a person to formally diagnose me. 1 hour of testing, and the individual, who was not qualified for proper diagnosis, told us I have short-term memory loss. At the time, it was year 2000. We didn't have the internet, so there was no way for us to realize that short-term memory loss is not a real diagnosis, nor to know that the person they had sent was not qualified to do this testing. So we believed a doctor and the individual that came to my home. The school board sent in an educational assistant who they hoped could help me with improving my short-term memory loss. They thought with practice my memory problems would all go away and disappear. They gave me extra homework in hopes that it would train my brain to function properly, to fix my memory. This was causing me to have nightly meltdowns and freakouts, since I had more of a workload than my peers. Eventually, we started tackling homework by stopping very often at home and avoid getting me overwhelmed or stressed. The educational assistant noticed I had motor skill problems as well as memory problems. And also because I held pencils strangely. So, once again, they wanted to find something physically wrong with me. I went to the doctor, who confirmed once again everything was normal, my eyesight was fine, did not have any deformities, so they sent me another 2 educational assistants who tried to fix me because they believed that with practice, this too would disappear. They would then throw balls at me, and I had to try to catch them or tell me to go left, right, etc. That didn't help. The educational assistant also tried to train me how to properly hold a pencil, how to react when overwhelmed instead of crying, and how to follow directions. After a while, they noticed that I was a little better cured, so they stopped helping me. At the end of grade 8, my teacher and principal told me, not my mom, that if I wanted to continue to have an official individual learning plan, to have I already read that. I would have to be reevaluated. I pondered it for a moment, but after having 2 hours of homework, being secluded from my peers, and being clearly different from everyone else, I did not want any more help from the educational assistants, who seemed to not understand me at all. I refused. I did not want more brain scans and people coming to my home looking to fix me and find what's wrong with me. High school, and instead of having the individual learning plan, I just told my teachers myself that I had a memory problem. Thankfully, most of them were understanding, and they gave me a lot of help. For example, at one point, I was failing my English class in grade 9, until I explained my memory loss problems to my teacher. Even without a formal diagnosis, my teacher believed me, agreed to help with my homework, and graded me less harshly. They also took into consideration that my first language was French. Because of that type of support, I was able to graduate from high school. So, by the time I graduated high school, I was an adult and clearly had a disability, but did not have a proper diagnosis. I struggled finding work. Eventually, I finally got a job at a call center, and the managers there started to notice I made the same mistakes even after they told me how to do things properly. I was so scared that they would find out that I had a disability that I decided to move to another job, somewhere else, as a cashier. It was around this time where I started to realize my disability was much more than just memory problems. I noticed that I can be very eccentric. I could not get along with people my own age, really, at this point. I was unable to do basic everyday tasks, like cooking anything other than chicken fingers and fries. I also realized that I didn't perceive the world like everyone else. For example, when I look at a room, it kind of flips over in my head and in my memory. Left looks right, right looks left. I struggled understanding jokes and sarcasm. I relied on others to make plans for me, or I would just shut down. I could not follow directions whatsoever, but even though I had a strong feeling that this diagnosis I got as a kid was wrong, I didn't want to get tested again because I was afraid of losing my independence. Plus, I needed more money than what the government would give me if I stopped working and lived on my disability benefits alone. My fiance, now husband, helped me a lot to cope with my disability at home. My biggest struggle, though, had to be my work as a cashier. I couldn't count cash, so the amount on the register was always off. I couldn't read my schedule, so I sometimes missed work. Well, actually, for 3 months straight, I was going in at the wrong time. So after about 3 months of working as a cashier, the manager wanted to get me tested for a disability and cut my hours. So I just quit. I could not handle it yet. I did not want to be told once again I needed fixing when I knew my disability was just part of who I am. A year went by. I had no work, couldn't land a job, kept failing interviews. I worried that I made the wrong choice to quit my job, and I would finally have to get diagnosed and live off disability benefits. Then I managed to find another job as a cashier, again, at the food court at a university. I didn't want to work as a cashier again, but I had no other choice. My supervisor noticed that my cash register was always off. So luckily, I was changed positions. I tried making sandwiches, but I couldn't recall what people asked for, so I was moved to pizza. I could not properly make pizza other than pepperoni, so I became a runaround doing little jobs for everyone. Stayed into that job for about 2 years. My husband and I decided to move back in my hometown. I went back to work at the call center and once again managed to stay there for a while, mostly because of coworkers and supervisors covering for me and helping me a lot. But after a while, the stress of the job started to affect my mental health, so I had to leave. Not long afterwards, I gave birth to my daughter, and I was too busy raising her to work, but money had been tight. So, just a few months ago, I guess a year ago now, I decided to apply for a part-time job that I could do online for home. The job involved being good at reading people, understanding whether something is appropriate or not on websites, which I thought I could do very well. But to my surprise, I couldn't pass the initial screening test. I failed it twice. Around the same time, I was also reading a blog that one of my friends wrote about autism. I felt like I really connected with it and started to wonder if I might be autistic. I mentioned it to my best friend who does research with autistic people, and she thought I was onto something and encouraged me to get diagnosed by a clinical psychologist. After some debate, I decided to go see my doctor and ask for a referral to see a psychologist. I thought I could trust him. But then he started asking me the same questions the first doctor asked. When I was a child, did you get into a car accident? Did you ever get dropped on your head? Has this gotten any worse or better since childhood? He asked me 1,000 times if I had done drugs and made me do a blood test, which I did not really want to do. I was overwhelmed. I had PTSD from childhood. I felt like a kid again, where no one was listening to me. After a week, I went back to the doctor's office. My blood test was clear, surprise, but my doctor was still convinced that there was something physically wrong with me that he wanted to fix, so he scheduled a brain scan. I didn't want to do it. I knew for sure my disability was not something you could find in a brain scan. I called the doctor's receptionist and said that the brain scan were meant to check for epilepsy. The doctor made it sound like I get confused and pass out. That was not at all what I said was my problem. I was misunderstood once again. I called the doctor and said, "No, I'm not doing this." He told me that I was being difficult and that we need to find what's wrong with you. I was so triggered, I just hung up the phone in a blur. I cried. I took a fit. Luckily, I had one more person to call, my counselor, who was helping me with my depression since my daughter was born. He gave me one of the only psychologists in my town, who could do the diagnosis test for me. I was so excited, I thought, finally I will get my answers. I called the psychologist's office and was so upset when the receptionist told me that the test would cost me $1,700. I cried. I did not have the money and knew it would be almost impossible for me to save up that money, especially without a job. Felt so lost and helpless. Luckily, my best friend was very supportive of me getting a diagnosis, and she gave me the money to pay for the test. I was ecstatic, but this meant that I had to go through a very long, trying day of psychological tests. First, I had to fill out a bunch of questionnaires. Then I had to do a bunch of cognitive tests, including a word association test, a stacking test, a test for color blindness, shapes test, a math speed test. One of the tests that burned into my memory was the one where I was shown an image on a screen and I needed to imitate it with the blocks that I had. I did terribly at that. I also remember that I had to read stories and answer some questions about the story afterwards. That was tough. The psychologist also tested my memory by showing me an image and then a similar one, and then asking me to point out the differences in the second image. After that task, I had a short break, and then testing continued. I was tested on my writing and verbal comprehension. I also got tested on how well I read and read out loud. Finally, at the end of the day, I did a test where I had to hit spacebar every time there was an X. I believe it was the X. I kept forgetting when I was supposed to hit it or not, and by the time my brain would recognize that it was an X, I was already looking at the next thing, so it was really tough for me. Based on my test results, the psychologist diagnosed me with ADHD, which I knew wasn't right. I have literally never had any kind of attention problem in my entire life. He also said I have executive function disorder, memory impairment association disorder, and neurodevelopment disorder. No mention of autism. I thought that was really off. So I scheduled a call with my psychologist to ask about it. I invited my mom to join the call because I was nervous and wanted moral support. During the call, when I asked the psychologist if he tested for autism, he said he didn't because he essentially assumed that I'd already been tested for it back then when I was a kid. Then he started asking me and my mom questions on how I was as a child, like if I ever stimmed or was cold or aloof. After we answered the questions, he said that I would need to do some extra testing for autism, so a few weeks later I had to go back for the testing to the office to fill out one page, which took less than 10 minutes to fill out, that they never gave me the first time around. So finally, after years and years without a proper diagnosis, the psychologist confirmed that I am indeed autistic. Honestly, I am so relieved. Getting a diagnosis really should not be this hard, and there is no reason why a doctor in 2019 should be allowed to say that to people who seem to have a cognitive disability, we need to find what's wrong with you to fix you. Sometimes you can't see a disability. Sometimes there is nothing wrong with the person. We need to stop using those words. We need to stop trying to fix and change people until we know the true diagnosis. Wow, this has went on for a long time. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned for the next video in this series about how autism affects my daily life. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. I will be more than happy to answer them. Peace.